When I was 3 months pregnant, my husband, who also happened to be my commanding officer, Captain Adrian Blake, slid a divorce petition across the kitchen table like it was a routine supply form. His voice was careful. Too careful. "Grace," he said, "this is temporary. Just a formality." A formality. That was what he called the moment he tried to cut me loose. His excuse had a name and a face. My sister-in-law, Sienna Hart, had recently lost her husband, Lieutenant Ethan Blake. She was pregnant, she was grieving, and, according to Adrian, she had no one to take care of her. "So I'm bringing her to the base," he said, eyes steady, tone noble. "She needs support. The baby needs stability. Once she gives birth and can handle things on her own, I'll remarry you." In my first life, I had begged. I had refused. I had clung to the title of wife like it was a life raft, believing love meant endurance, believing marriage meant you fought until your fingers bled. Because I refused, Sienna went to the hospital for an abortion, and she died on that table, hemorrhaged, quietly, along with the child. From that moment on, Adrian's grief curdled into hatred, and he poured it into me like poison. When I was 6 months pregnant, he brought men to catch me, bursting into a room as if he were leading a raid, dragging me out into the open and accusing me of sleeping with a local drifter named Derek Cole. I was framed so cleanly the whole base believed it. Whispers became verdicts. Stares became stones. Adrian got his divorce anyway. Then he sent me to a labour re-education camp with a stamped file and a cold signature. The camp didn't care that I was pregnant. It didn't care that my body was failing. When I was 8 months along, the heavy work split me open from the inside, and I gave birth too early, on a filthy floor, with no mercy in the walls. My baby died first. I followed not long after, my last breath tasting like rust and regret. So when I opened my eyes again and found myself back in that same kitchen, belly newly round, sunlight in the same place on the table, and Captain Adrian Blake staring at me with that practiced patience, I understood immediately. He was asking again. "Grace," he said, soft as a hymn, "we need to do this. For Sienna." In my first life, that sentence had been the beginning of my end. This time, I didn't blink. "No need to wait," I said, taking the pen from his hand. "Let's go file for divorce right now." The relief that flashed across his face was so quick he probably thought no one could see it. I made one request. A clean one. A number with sharp edges. $500, I said. Child support expenses. He agreed without hesitation. Like he was paying off a parking ticket. We went straight to the Civil Affairs office. The stamp came down. The certificate slid across. And when Adrian held it in his hand, he exhaled like a man stepping out of a storm. His voice softened afterward, as if kindness could rewrite history. "Don't worry. It's only temporary. Once Sienna and the baby are settled, I'll remarry you." I smiled, but it wasn't warmth. It was the kind of smile you give a liar when you already know the ending. Even an animal protects its young. Yet Adrian had destroyed me and the child in my womb for Sienna's sake. He had done it once. He would do it again, if I stood still long enough. I turned and walked down the steps without answering. Behind me, he hurried after me. His tone gentler, almost tender. "Grace, without me around, take care of yourself. Take care of the baby. If you need anything, tell me." And that was when Sienna, waiting outside like a guest of honor, let her mask slip. Her eyes rolled, impatient. Then she clutched her stomach and cried out, loud enough for an audience. "Oh no, my stomach, it hurts." Adrian's face snapped into panic. He didn't glance at me again. He surged forward, scooped her up, and carried her to the jeep like she was something precious and fragile. Sienna looped her arms around his neck and looked back at me over his shoulder. Her smile was small, triumphant, a silent declaration. See, I win. In my first life, I hadn't understood what I was watching. This time, the truth sat on my tongue like iron. Adrian hadn't loved her out of duty. He'd loved her all along. I knew Sienna better than he ever did. I had lived with her. I had watched her collect attention like jewelry. Even before she married Ethan, men circled her. After, the circling never stopped. When Ethan was away on duty, I'd seen strangers slip through doors that should have been locked. I had warned Adrian once. I told him the child might not even be Ethan's. He called me jealous, vicious, a woman poisoning a widow's name. Later, after he ruined me, I learned the most disgusting detail of all. Among Sienna's lovers was Adrian himself. So of course he wanted to take care of her. Of course he wanted to give her a title and a shield and a story the world would applaud. This time, I chose distance. I chose silence. I chose survival. It took me 2 hours to walk home. Near my door, a man lurked in the shade, glancing around like a thief. I recognized him instantly. Derek Cole, the same man Adrian had used to destroy me in my first life. Derek's grin spread when he saw me. "Grace," he said, sweet as rot. "Where've you been?" I lifted the divorce papers slightly, letting the sunlight hit the ink. His eyes lit up. "You really divorced him?" "Yes," I said calmly. "He's busy taking care of Sienna and her baby." Derek leaned closer, greedy for gossip. "So, that baby's his, right?" I laughed, low and sharp. "You really think you're the only man she's been with?" I said. "There's Mason at the power plant, Travis from the boiler works, Liam from the machine shop. And that's just what I know." The colour drained from his face as if I'd pulled a plug. He had believed Sienna belonged to him, that the child belonged to him, that Adrian was the fool they could use as a shield. Now he finally understood. There wasn't a romance here. There was a feeding frenzy. Derek stormed off, rage swallowing his steps, and I watched him go with a quiet satisfaction I hadn't earned in my first life. Then I went inside and started planning like a woman who remembered what dying felt like. I opened my drawer, counted my savings, and stitched the bills into the lining of my clothes with steady hands, because I knew what came next, and I refused to be caught empty-handed again. "What about your salary?" Adrian demanded, his voice sharpening as if he could slice the air with rank alone. 3 years as my wife. Where did all that money go? I didn't flinch. I didn't lower my eyes the way I used to. "Your salary is gone," I said, steady and clear. "Because you never gave me a single dollar. Not once. You expect me to live on air, Adrian Blake. Do you think pregnancy runs on oxygen and good intentions?" His jaw tightened. "And your mother," I continued, each word landing like a nail. "She comes every few days, demanding money, demanding food, demanding tribute like she owns me. I'm not a printing machine. So tell me, Captain, where exactly do you think the money is supposed to come from?" He stared at me as if I'd violated protocol by speaking like a human being. I stepped closer, close enough to see the faint twitch near his temple. "You promised $500, I reminded him. "Support for me and the baby after the divorce. It's time to keep your word. Give me the money." A shadow crossed his face. His voice dropped into that cold, official tone he used on soldiers who disappointed him. "I don't have that much right now." I narrowed my eyes. "So you're breaking your promise?" He didn't answer. And that silence was a confession. "Fine," I said softly, dangerously. "You wanted to take care of Sienna Hart." I stepped aside, I signed the papers. I gave you exactly what you wanted. But don't tell me you're shameless enough to steal from your own child. His gaze flickered. Not guilt. Calculation. The baby inside me is your flesh and blood. I said, you will give me the money right now. And if you don't, I didn't finish. Because I didn't need to. Adrian understood perfectly what the rest of that sentence could do to him. A captain on a military base. Involved with his brother's wife. Pushing his pregnant wife into divorce. Hiding it all under the word duty. If that story ever reached the wrong ears, it wouldn't just be gossip. It would be a career-ending scandal. In the end, he pulled the bills from his wallet with the reluctance of a man paying a ransom. He shoved the money into my hand, eyes dark, lips pressed into a line so thin it looked like a wound. Then he stormed out toward the market to buy a chicken, like he was punishing the world for being forced to honor his own promise. The moment Sienna learned he'd paid me, the fragile widow mask evaporated. She wasn't lying in bed anymore. She wasn't sighing softly. She wasn't clutching her stomach for attention. She marched into my space with her chin lifted and her jealousy burning so hot it could have boiled water. What gives you the right, she snapped, to take Adrian's money? I let out a short laugh, cold and almost amused. What gives me the right? I watched her face, watched the way her eyes sharpened like a knife, looking for a soft place to cut. That money, I said, is what Adrian owes me. He doesn't want me to expose you, so he pays for my silence. She froze for half a second, just half. Then she smiled, not embarrassed, triumphant. Oh, she breathed, mockingly pleased. So you already know. And with that, she stopped pretending altogether. There's no point hiding it anymore, she said, voice sweet as poison. Adrian loves me, and I'm not afraid to tell you. On my wedding night with Ethan, I was with Adrian. A chill moved down my spine, not because I was surprised, but because of how proudly she said it, like betrayal was a crown. She leaned closer, enjoying my silence. That night Ethan was drunk, she continued, eyes bright with the thrill of confession. He passed out. I couldn't stand the thought of serving him. So my mother-in-law, Margaret Blake, called Adrian over to help. Her laugh was soft and filthy. And right there, she said, beside Ethan, Adrian and I held each other. Disgust rose in my throat, but I swallowed it down. In my first life, I had wasted my emotions on people who fed on them. Now I stored mine like fuel. No wonder Adrian had fought so hard to divorce me. No wonder he had clung to Sienna like she was his rightful prize. He believed she was his great love. He believed she belonged to him, body and soul. And he believed the child in her womb was his proof. He probably even believed he was the only man she'd ever let touch her. In my first life, I had tried to tell him the truth, that she had men slipping in and out of her life like shadows, that she collected lovers the way some women collected perfume. He had called me vile. So fine. In this life, he could have her. He could be bound to her forever. He could drink from the same cup until he discovered what was rotting at the bottom. Sienna's gaze dropped to my belly. Her voice cooled, sharpened. Since you already know everything, Grace, she said, stop dreaming about getting back together with Adrian. You should get rid of that baby. I stared at her, my voice turning to ice. Why should I? She scoffed. Because Adrian won't let it be born. I felt the air change. Even the walls seemed to listen. He told me himself, she whispered, smiling. Within 3 days, he'll make sure the child inside you dies. No grave, no name, nothing. I believed her. Because in my first life, he had done worse. And if he thought I would play the same role again, he was a fool. This time, if they reached for my throat, I would bite back. When Adrian returned, he brought an old hen under his arm. And behind him, like a shadow that never left his family, came his mother, Margaret Blake. While Adrian was in the kitchen, muttering and preparing to slaughter the chicken, Margaret walked straight into my room as if it belonged to her. Her eyes were sharp, triangular, merciless. "I'm sick," she said, not asking, only declaring. "I need treatment in the city hospital. I need $500. Give it to me now." I looked at her for a long moment, letting the silence stretch until it started to sting. Since the day I married Adrian, this woman had never treated me like family. I was too stiff, too quiet, not sweet-tongued enough, not useful enough. I could bleed for her son and she would still complain the floor wasn't clean. She adored Sienna, of course. The soft voice, the fluttering lashes, the fake delicacy that made older women feel powerful and needed. Sienna had never given her a cent, never lifted a finger, yet Margaret would brag about her like she'd birthed a saint. Margaret still thought I was the old Grace, the mule, the silence, the woman who swallowed humiliation and called it love. But that Grace died once already. I lifted my chin. "If you need money," I said, "go ask your son, or ask your precious daughter-in-law. Why come to me?" Her brows slammed down. "I'm an outsider now," I added. "Adrian and I are divorced." For a second she looked stunned, like she couldn't compute refusal from someone she considered property. Then she exploded. "You ungrateful curse," she screamed. "How dare you talk back to me? Who gave you the nerve to demand $500 from my son? You think you're worth that much? Look at you. You're lucky anyone ever married you." I smiled, slow and sharp. "Whether I'm worth it isn't for you to decide," I said. "That money came from your dear son and your beloved Sienna. They paid to buy my silence." Her face flushed purple. "You liar," she shrieked. "How dare you slander my son? I should slap you to death." I rose to my feet and met her glare head-on. "Watch your mouth," I said quietly, "because if you make me angry, I might shout. And if I shout, the neighbours might hear. And neighbours love stories, especially stories about a captain and his brother's wife." Margaret froze. She could hate me, but she feared scandal more than she loved her own breath. She stormed out, shaking with rage, but she didn't touch me. Adrian had brought her home hoping she could bully the money back out of my hands. Instead, they learned a new truth. I wasn't prey anymore. Sienna Hart came running the moment she heard Margaret Blake's shriek, her slippers slapping the floor like a hurried confession. Adrian appeared right behind her, face stiff, jaw set, the perfect soldier rushing to handle a situation. They each grabbed one of Margaret's arms and half carried, half dragged her outside. Margaret wailed the entire way, her voice thick and nasal, mangled by the gap where her two front teeth used to be. She didn't cry like someone hurt. She cried like someone performing. "That woman doesn't care about this house," she howled, loud enough for the neighbours to hear through the thin walls. "She's always running off, always talking back. She scolded me for nothing, refused to feed me, and now she even hit me. Hit me. A mother. Me." Sienna chimed in, soft and trembling, adding just enough seasoning to make it sound believable. "Grace has been unstable lately. The divorce upset her. She's been so cold." A setup. A clean one. They were laying the groundwork, building a story so when their real trap snapped shut tonight, no one would pity me. No one would question them. They wanted the neighbourhood to see me as a cruel wife first, so when they painted me as an unfaithful wife next, the picture would look complete. Fine. If they wanted war, I would stop pretending I was someone who deserved peace. By 7 that evening, Adrian, Margaret, and Sienna finally returned home. The house felt different, as if it had learned to hold its breath. I stayed in my room, silent, waiting, not for rescue, but for the moment their plot stepped into the light. Half an hour later, my door opened. Adrian stood there with a bowl in his hands, brown sugar and egg soup, warm steam rising like a gentle lie. For the first time all day, he wore a smile. "You must be hungry," he said softly. "I made this for you." His voice slipped into tenderness, the kind that once would have made my eyes sting. "I know the divorce hurt you, Grace, but there's really nothing between me and Sienna. I'm only taking care of her because of Ethan. Don't listen to gossip. And my mother," he sighed, like a tired saint. "You know how she is. Don't take her words to heart." In my first life, those words would have broken me open. I would have wanted to believe him, because believing him was easier than facing the truth. But I had already died once because of this man's kindness. I stared into his eyes, calm as ice. "It isn't gossip," I said. "Your affair is fact." His smile faltered. "Sienna told me herself," I continued, watching his pupils tighten. "She said on her wedding night, you were already with her, beside Ethan." For a second, Adrian looked like someone had slapped him. He hadn't expected Sienna to spill that secret. Then he forced a weak laugh, hurriedly stitching his mask back into place. "She was talking nonsense," he said. "Don't believe her. I'm not that kind of man." I tilted my head. "Why would she lie?" I asked flatly. "Who drags herself through the mud for no reason?" His mouth opened, then closed. "And she also said," I added, "the baby she's carrying is yours." "That's impossible," Adrian snapped, but the words shook, just slightly, like a cracked board underweight. "I'll talk to her. I'll make her explain it to you." He shoved the bowl forward, his smile returning too quickly. "Drink this first," he urged. "Then I'll call Sienna over, and we'll clear it up." Of course, he didn't want clarity. He wanted obedience. He wanted to watch me swallow his drugged soup and sink into the helplessness he'd already prepared. I took the bowl, and I drank every drop in front of him. Adrian's shoulders loosened, the way a man relaxes when the lock clicks into place. He turned, picked up the chopsticks, like a thoughtful husband tidying up. "If you're tired, take off your shoes and rest," he said gently. "You've been through a lot." I played my part. I took off my shoes. I lay down. I let my face go slack, my eyelids heavy, a perfect imitation of surrender. As he stepped out, I caught the faint curl at the corner of his mouth. A smirk. A cold, satisfied line of cruelty. The door shut. Half an hour later, a shadow slid down the hallway. Someone crept to my door and pushed it open just enough to slip inside. The floorboards whispered. A breath. A pause. Then the bed frame began to creak, slow and rhythmic. The sound of weight shifting. Wood complaining in the dark. 15 minutes after that, Margaret Blake tiptoed up, pressed her ear to my door. The creaking continued. Margaret's lips stretched into a sly, victorious grin. She turned and hurried out, muttering venom through her broken teeth. "You shameless thing," she hissed. "Enjoy it while you can. Tonight will be the night you die." Fueled by hatred and the humiliation of her missing teeth, she practically flew across the yard to the neighbours. She pounded on Mr. and Mrs. Thompson's door, breathless and urgent. "Sienna's having terrible stomach pains," she cried. "Adrian isn't home. He had to go out for work. Please help us take her to the hospital." Of course they agreed. Good people always rush toward emergencies. Margaret didn't stop there. She claimed it was too dangerous to travel at night, called 2 more houses, then 2 more, gathering a crowd as if she were collecting witnesses for a trial. Soon, More than 10 neighbours followed her back, lanterns and flashlights bobbing like curious fireflies. But instead of rushing to Sienna, Margaret stopped at my door. She pounded hard. "Grace," she shouted, "Sienna's in pain. She needs the hospital. Bring her maternity pants, quick." Without waiting, she shoved the door open. A second later, her scream ripped through the house, sharp as a blade. "Who is that?" she shrieked. "Grace, there's a man in your bed. You filthy thing. How dare you cheat on my son?" She lunged forward and tore the blanket off with both hands, ready to drag the man into the light. The blanket flew, and her triumph froze. There was no man. There was no body. There wasn't even me. Only a large wooden crate under the covers, arranged just right, heavy enough to make the bed creak, positioned to mimic movement. Margaret stood there, stunned, mouth hanging open. Behind her, Mrs. Thompson and the others crowded in, blinking, confused, hungry for scandal. "What did you just say?" Mrs. Thompson demanded, voice rising. "An affair." "This looks like no affair," another neighbour muttered, folding her arms. Margaret went pale, her eyes darting like trapped mice. She had seen the shadow enter. She had heard the bed. She had been so certain. Then, from outside, my voice exploded through the night. Loud, ragged, full of fury and heartbreak. "I can't live like this anymore." The crowd froze. "My husband," I cried, voice breaking perfectly on the right syllables. "My husband has been sneaking around with Sienna Hart behind my back. Adrian Blake, you heartless bastard, are you even human?" The neighbours whirled toward the sound. They rushed down the hall, toward Sienna's room. The door flew open, and there I was, gripping a rolling pin like a weapon, tears streaking my face, my hands shaking with the kind of rage that looked real because it was. On the bed, Adrian was naked, blood trickling down his temple. Sienna clung to him, scrambling for a blanket, her hair a mess, her eyes wide with panic. "Didn't you say you were going out for work?" I screamed, and swung again, the rolling pin cracking against the headboard. "So this is your work?" Between her sheets, Adrian groaned, trying to shield his head. "You dog!" I shouted, tears burning hot. "Do you even deserve to call yourself Ethan's brother?" I turned on Sienna, my voice turning sharp and disgusted. "And you," I spat. "I fed you. I treated you like family. And this is how you repay me, crawling into my husband's bed." The crowd at the doorway stared, stunned, horror dawning slowly, deliciously, like sunrise. I pointed at them, voice shaking. "Everyone look closely. These two shameless creatures have been humiliating me right under my nose." Whispers erupted like sparks. "His wife is pregnant," someone hissed. "And he's with his sister-in-law," another muttered. "Shameless." Then the groans changed. At first, people assumed it was from my beating, but then the minutes passed. And no matter how Adrian tried to move, no matter how Sienna shifted, they didn't separate. Their faces twisted, not with lust now, but with pain and panic. Someone in the crowd gasped. "Wait. Are they stuck?" A ripple of disbelief slammed through the doorway. "Oh my God. Is that even possible?" Adrian and Sienna screamed, their voices raw, echoing through the house like punishment made audible. And above the chaos, I sobbed louder, clutching my belly with one hand, the rolling pin in the other, and delivered the final blow, not to flesh, but to reputation. "He forced me to divorce him," I cried. "He swore it was temporary. He swore he was only helping her. And this is what he's been doing all along." The neighbours stared at Adrian and Sienna with eyes full of judgment, disgust, and something worse than anger. Contempt. And someone whispered, slow and sharp, as if the math had just clicked into place. Ethan's only been dead 3 months, she said. But Sienna's already 2 months pregnant. Another voice answered, colder. Doesn't take a genius to figure out whose baby that is. Another voice cut through the chaos, low and bitter. Even a wild animal wouldn't abandon its pregnant mate for another woman. But he throws his own wife aside to care for his brother's widow. I'd bet my life that baby is his. Poor Ethan, someone else muttered, shaking their head. He hasn't even been gone long enough for the soil to settle, and his own brother is already crawling into his widow's bed. The words spread like sparks in dry grass, snapping from mouth to mouth. The crowd Margaret had dragged here to shame me was now devouring Adrian and Sienna alive instead. Every glance, every whisper, every disgusted inhale became a blade aimed at them. One man leaned forward, voice dark with suspicion. These kinds of affairs don't start overnight, and tragedies don't always happen by accident. Who's to say Ethan's death was really just fate? That was the moment Margaret Blake truly panicked. Her eyes darted wildly, trying to snatch control back from a scene she could no longer steer. Everyone go home, she rasped, waving her hands as if she could push the crowd away. This isn't what it looks like. Get out, all of you. But no one moved. She had summoned them here herself, and human curiosity doesn't walk away when the curtain finally rises. In fact, more people arrived by the minute. Neighbours from 2 streets over. A few night shift workers passing by. Even strangers who'd heard shouting and followed the noise like it was a parade. The Blake house had never seen so many faces packed shoulder to shoulder. Inside the room, Adrian and Sienna were still tangled in a humiliating mess of panic and shame, unable to compose themselves, unable to regain any dignity. Their cries didn't earn sympathy. They only fed the hunger in the crowd. Margaret's desperation turned into fury the instant she saw me still holding the rolling pin, still striking Adrian, his face smeared with blood, his eyes wide with fear. "Stop it!" she shrieked, lunging at me. "Stop hitting him!" I didn't stop. 2 lifetimes of hatred burned through my veins, heavy and hot. I swung again and again, each blow a repayment, each impact a final answer to every time I had been forced to swallow my pain. Margaret shoved me with all her strength. I was already exhausted from the struggle. Her shove sent me stumbling backward. I let out a sharp scream as I hit the floor, my hands flying to my stomach. "My baby," I cried, voice cracking like glass. "My baby." The crowd surged, alarmed. Several neighbours rushed forward, helping me up, their hands trembling when they saw blood spreading beneath me. "Call a car," someone shouted. "Get her to the hospital. Now." They carried me out like I was fragile, like I was innocent, like I was the only person in this house who had ever suffered. And in a way, that was true. Of course, the baby couldn't be saved, but that had been my decision long before this night ever began. Earlier that day, I had already taken the medicine, quietly, without ceremony, because from the moment I returned to life, I knew I would never tie my future to Adrian Blake's blood again. I refused to give him a child he could later weaponize. I refused to leave anything of myself in the hands of that family. Tonight's collapse was simply the perfect cover. The perfect story. Shock, stress, a cruel mother-in-law, a cheating husband, a pregnant wife pushed too far. No one would question it. No one would doubt me. What they would remember was the scandal, the shame, the sound of my sobbing, the sight of Adrian and Sienna exposed for what they truly were. That was my counterattack. Their trap had been a stage built to destroy me. I simply walked onto it first and changed the ending. At the hospital, everything moved fast. White lights, cold metal, orders snapped between nurses. I was pushed down hallways while the waiting room buzzed with voices like a swarm. Even through the blur, I heard them. "My God," a woman whispered. A military officer. Always so strict-looking. And he's rotten to the core. And with his brother's widow, someone replied, voice thick with disgust. Right in the same house. Another voice. Sharper. Suspicious. Ethan's only been dead 3 months. And she's already pregnant. That math doesn't lie. A man snorted. If it's not Adrian's, it's one of the others. That woman was never clean. An older man spoke next, low and grim. Affairs like that bring blood. Mark my words. That death wasn't an accident. I closed my eyes and let the gossip wash over me like rain on stone. Let them talk. Every whisper was a nail in Adrian's coffin. When I woke afterward, weak but clear-minded, I didn't rest. Not yet. I asked for a phone. I called Adrian's unit and filed an official report. Moral misconduct, abuse of position, inappropriate relations with a dependent under his care. The officer on the line went silent for a long moment, then answered in a voice that was professional, but strained. We will dispatch an investigation team immediately, he said. Your report will be recorded. Only then did I allow myself to sink back into the pillow, because I knew something Adrian had always underestimated. Once a scandal like this breaks, it can't be stitched shut again, no matter how high his rank, no matter how many favours he owed, no matter how hard Margaret tried to scrub the story clean. The world had seen them. And then fate handed me one more gift. That morning, my neighbour, Mrs. Turner, slipped into my hospital room like she was carrying treasure. She leaned close, eyes bright with excitement. Grace, she whispered, you won't believe it. Adrian got beaten in the hospital last night. I kept my face calm, though satisfaction warmed my chest. Really? I murmured, pretending shock. Who did it? Mrs. Turner lowered her voice even further, delighted by her own news. Who else? The Cole family, she said. They came straight to the hospital and went after him like wolves. They say he left with broken ribs, and one eye was damaged so badly it might never heal. I stared at the ceiling, letting my breathing stay even, letting my expression stay soft and harmless. Inside, I smiled. Because now, Adrian Blake wasn't just falling. He was being torn apart from every side. And I hadn't even finished. I let my mouth fall open and drew in a sharp breath, performing shock the way women like me were expected to. Oh my! What happened? I whispered. Why would the Cole family do something like that? Nora Turner sat beside my hospital bed, her hands clasped tight in her lap, eyes full of pity and fierce satisfaction on my behalf. You poor thing, she said. You've been used and betrayed, and you still try to see good in people. But don't worry. God's watching, and he's finally giving you justice. Then she leaned in and poured the whole story into my ear like hot tea. Last night, she murmured, Sienna's heart went out, quiet as a cat. No one knows where she went at first, but later people saw her near Derek Cole's place. You know, that man everyone warns their daughters about. Anyway, after she met him, he followed her back, and then he never came home. My face stayed calm, my eyes wide, my breathing carefully uneven. Early this morning, Nora continued, lowering her voice. They found Derek unconscious by your outhouse, barely alive, blood everywhere. The Cole family rushed him to the hospital. The doctors saved him, but... She grimaced, disgust and anger twisting her mouth. But he'll never be the same again. Some injuries don't heal. I swallowed as if horrified. Inside, my thoughts didn't tremble at all. They moved like clockwork. When Derek finally woke up, Nora said, he was screaming from pain. Before he passed out again, he told his family everything. About Sienna, about her schemes, about how she had him wrapped around her finger. He thought the baby she was carrying belonged to him. So he did whatever she asked. Nora's gaze sharpened as she watched my reaction. Grace, she pressed, tell me the truth. Were you the one who hurt him? I shook my head immediately. Firm and innocent. Of course not. Then I gave her exactly the story she wanted to believe. A story with clean edges and a believable rhythm. Last night, Adrian brought me that brown sugar egg soup, I said softly. It made me feel sick, bloated. You know how it is when you're pregnant. I was in and out of the bathroom all night. Nora nodded vigorously. That's true. When I was expecting, I barely slept. And when I came back from the bathroom, I added, I passed by Sienna's room and heard strange noises. Her husband has been gone for months, so I thought, who could be in there with her? I listened and I heard Adrian's voice. Nora's eyes widened. So, that's how it happened. I lowered my gaze, letting my lashes tremble like a woman still trying to make sense of betrayal. I grabbed the rolling pin, I whispered, and I went in. Nora let out a long breath. Then the one who knocked Derek out. It must have been Adrian, she concluded quickly, eager to tie the knot herself. You're pregnant. There's no way you could have done that kind of damage. I didn't correct her. I simply nodded, letting her stitch my innocence into place with her own hands. And when the Cole family heard Derek's confession, Nora went on, voice buzzing with outrage. They went wild. They realized Adrian and Sienna were using Derek as a pawn, setting him up, ruining him. And the Coles don't forgive. They sent young men to the hospital and beat Adrian like he was a dog in the street. Bones cracked, face smashed. He screamed so loud the whole ward heard it. She paused, then added with grim satisfaction, Sienna didn't get away either. She tried to slip out when she saw Adrian getting beaten. They caught her outside. And after what she did to Derek, they didn't show mercy. I heard she started bleeding after, lost the baby. And the doctors had to make sure she'll never carry another child again. I kept my face composed, but I could feel something dark and steady settle in my chest, like a stone finally finding its place. Good. Let the future she tried to steal from me be burned out of her body. The next part came faster than even I expected. The base sent investigators the very next day. By then, the entire county had already done half their job for them. Witnesses were everywhere. Whispers had names. And evidence was scattered through that house like broken glass. Adrian Blake wasn't protected. Not this time. He was discharged, stripped, expelled. When he regained consciousness and heard the decision, Nora told me he let out one miserable cry, like a wounded animal realizing the trap had finally closed. And then he fainted again. 3 days later, I was discharged too. I returned home and found Margaret Blake in my kitchen, stirring a pot as if she still owned the air in my house. In less than a week, she looked 10 years older. Her face was scratched and swollen, the kind of damage that spoke of people who had finally stopped being polite. When she saw me, hatred twisted her features. You wicked snake, she spat. You think you've won. Just wait and see how I deal with you. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I grabbed her by the hair, slapped her hard enough to turn her threats into screams, then dragged her to the door and threw her out into the dirt like trash that had overstayed its welcome. This is my house, I said coldly. If you step in again, you'll crawl out again. She shrieked about calling the police. Go ahead, I said, and crossed my arms. When the officers arrived, I handed them the divorce certificate. I told them the house was mine, left by my parents, and neither Adrian nor his mother had any claim. The whole town already knew the scandal. The officers looked at Margaret the way you look at a thief caught with a full pocket. They ordered her off my property. That night, I gathered every last thing Adrian and Sienna had ever touched in my home. Clothes, photos, cheap gifts, little tokens of lies, and I threw them all away. Then I made the only decision a woman who had died once could make. I sold the house. I quit the job. I left town before the cornered dogs remembered how to bite. I went south, where the wind of change was moving through the streets like a promise. I started small. A stall, a rack of clothes, a ledger in my own handwriting. And I grew, not with luck, but with hunger and clarity. 3 years later, I owned 10 shops. And one crisp autumn evening, as I stepped out of a restaurant toward my car, someone called my name. Grace. Grace Lewis. I turned. Nora Turner stood there smiling, round cheeks, bright eyes, the same woman who had once carried my story through town like a lantern. And when she took my hands, warm and proud, she whispered, "You made it." I smiled back. Not the old smile of endurance. A new one. The smile of a woman who finally belonged to herself.